everybody, Dave Thomas here again, and for the next several days I'll be building the Rocketarium Gadfly model rocket. This is a scale model of the Russian SA-11 surface-to-air missile, and it's actually one of their easier kits in their scale model line. This rocket uses a cluster of 18mm motors, and so this is also a relatively easy way to start in on clustered rockets. Okay, as with any kit, we want to check the contents here. And so let's take a look at our parts list. We have some decals here, both water slide and then a self-adhesive vinyl strip. Right, parachute, balsa fins, okay, and those balsa fins are inside the larger body tube. So here's what you should have there. And then we also have some smaller fins that are just kind of rattling loose in the box. Alright, next we have two body tubes. So a longer 15-inch one here, and this is where my long fins were. And then a shorter body tube. This will contain the parachute in the finished model. And nose cone, and I'm not quite sure what the two holes in the nose cone are for. I am contacting Rocketarium about that, and I'll let you know later in the video. Okay, ejection baffle kit, clustered rocket or rocket motor kit, and then we've got a small package here that contains the launch lugs, a shock cord, and some plasticine modeling clay, and this will be used for the nose weight. Do not get rid of this. We have to have that nose weight in there in order for this model to fly safely and stably. Okay, so it looks like we have everything that we're supposed to have, and I will clear this away and we will get started. The first step in the kit is to assemble the motor mount. And this comes with its own little set of sub-instructions here. The cluster motor mount comes with its own instructions here, and it's relatively straightforward. There's no engine retaining clip. This has to use friction fit for the motors simply because there isn't enough room to put clips in here. And so our first task is to install the thrust rings. These are a little bit smaller than standard ones in terms of their total thickness. And we're going to put these in the very tips here of each motor tube. Now we don't want to get too much glue down inside that might interfere with the motors. So I'm going to use an applicator here and put some just along the very edge. Okay, and then I'm going to put this in, just so, and then I'm going to put this down on a hard surface that I don't mind getting glue on, like the instructions here. Okay, and then just wipe off the excess glue there. And again, we just don't want any to drip down inside the tube. And then you can set this aside and do the other two. I am going to do that off camera. I've let these set for a good 5 minutes or so, and I'm using wood glue. If you're using white glue, I would let these dry for 10 to 15 minutes before handling them again. And our next task is to simply glue the tubes to each other, making sure that you've got the thrust ring on the same end all the way through. So I'm going to start by simply making a line of glue here. And then taking one of the other tubes and attaching that lengthwise like this. And then the third tube is going to go on top of the tube, and all of these are going to line up parallel. Okay, so if you kind of take a look here from one side, That gives me a little bit of an idea of where the next pieces of glue need to go. So I'm going to put a line of glue about here. And another line at about here. And if I need to, I can add more glue later. Okay, and again, making sure I've got all the thrust rings on the same end. I'm just going to put these together. Okay, so I can see a nice glue seam there and a nice one there. That one's a little off. Okay, but not too much. So if I want to, I could just take some more glue here, and I'm going to do this as a demonstration on this one, and just work it down in there. So if you don't think you've got a good seam, go ahead and work a little more glue down in there. Okay, and I'm going to just make sure that everything is level there. And a little bit of glue outside the seam's okay, but we don't want it up here on the outer edges. I'm just going to clean it off just to be sure. Okay, now we've got a little bit of incongruity here. I'm going to pull this apart just a little bit. Put that back. Because we do want all of these to be even with each other. Okay, and now I'm going to set this aside and let it dry for 10 to 15 minutes before we apply it to the centering ring. My glue has set up enough that I can work with it here. And so our next task is to glue this retaining ring onto the front of our cluster here. Now, they don't go through. In this case, the retaining ring, or the centering ring, acts as an additional engine block or thrust ring here. And so we're not trying to put the tubes through this. So here I'm going to get some more glue. Okay, I'm just going to put this around each ring. Again, we don't want to get glue down inside the motor mount tubes. If you get a little inside the thrust rings, that's fine. Alright, and then we're going to place this in line. Okay, so we need, first of all, we need to be in line with all of the tubes there, and then we want to check the outside and make sure that the edges of all of our motor tubes are flush with the edge of our centering ring here, and that looks like it's pretty good. Okay, so I'm just going to let this dry now for a good several hours before going on to the next part that involves this. In the meantime, though, we can go on to the nose cone. For the next part, we're going to put some weight into the front of the nose cone, and that's what this plasticine clay is for. There should be 40 grams of this. And again, you don't want to fly this without that nose weight in. If you're not going to use this, if you want to use epoxy or something like that, that's fine. But you need the nose weight in to keep it stable. Now the nose cone has been bored out here to allow us more access. If for some reason your nose cone did not get bored, you can just widen that with a drill or with a round rasp. Just make sure that you don't cut into the eyelet for the parachute. Okay, so you just need to cut this into smaller pieces, and depending on your preference, you can make them into little pellets and drop them in. I usually make them into little worms here. Alright, and then just drop those in. And then we'll just do this for the whole chunk of clay. And after we've got them in, we'll use a dowel or some other tool to pack them in. Okay, so now we need to push that all the way into the forward end of the nose. I'm going to at least start this with the handle of my knife. Just be careful you don't cut yourself there. Probably though, I'm going to need something longer. I'm just using a plastic rod here. And just go all the way around the circumference. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but if you get your lighting right, you'll be able to see through the translucent part of the nose cone. That can kind of guide where your tool needs to go here. We want to try and get all of the airspace out of it and get the clay as far forward as we can, because this is going to shift our center of gravity forward, which is going to make it more stable. Okay, and then when you finish with this, be sure to wash your hands well, and also take a paper towel or a rag with a little bit of soapy water and wash off the nose cone. The residue from the clay will prevent paint from sticking, and we don't want that to happen. In our next step, we need to mark the main body tube for the placement of the fins and the launch lug. And so first of all, we just need to cut out this guide from the back page. There's nothing behind it, so we're not cutting into anything critical. But if you do want to keep your instructions intact, go ahead and just make a photocopy of this. Okay, so now we're just going to wrap this around the body tube at either end, and then align those two tick marks there. And this is good for people like me who kind of made that sloppy cut there, but this will save us. Okay, so here we just want to go around and mark at either side of the guide. And now traditionally we use a door frame or other straight edge to make the next lines. I'm going to use this body tube marking guide here that Estes makes. And this just gives us a portable straight edge. And for all of these lines, we're going to go all the way down the length of the body tube. Okay, now it's kind of hard. It'll be kind of hard for you to see it, so I'm going to line it up here. But it's easier to do the drawing if I've got it down here sideways. Alright, so now I have 4 fin lines and a launch lug line that go all the way down the length of the body tube. The next step in the instructions is to install the engine cluster, and I am going to now mark my body tube here inconspicuously, just put aft on one end so that I don't get it confused later on. And so this whole assembly is going to slide in here until it is flush with the end. Okay, now unfortunately, most of the time when we've got just a single tube motor mount, we can put some glue up inside, put this in partially, and then put some glue in as well. Now we'll try and do that, but we can't make rings that way. Okay, so I'm going to need a ring of glue at about this point. And so let me get an applicator again here. Okay, so I want a ring of glue that will be just below where the centering ring is going to go in, so it pushes through it. So that's going to be about there, and I can mark that with my thumb. And now I can go ahead and just get a big glob of glue on here. Not so much that it's dripping, but close. And just go ahead and, using my thumb as a guide, make a circle of glue there. Okay, and then I'm going to slide that partially inside. And now I'm going to get some more glue, and again fairly heavy here. We're kind of doing this blind. I'm going to put this in just inside against the interior wall of the body tube. And the idea here is that as I slide the engine mount in, I'm going to twist it and smear that glue all over the inside and across the engine tubes themselves. Okay. I'm trying not to get a whole bunch just laying on the engine tubes, but if you do, it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm going to insert this as I twist it. And again, this should be smearing the glue all over, and this should be flush now. So I just press that against my work surface. Okay, and then if you need to, you can even add some glue in here. I don't think I really need to, but I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so you can take an applicator and just smooth some glue into the interior joints there. Now, this is probably redundant, but if you think you need more glue in there, this is a way to do it. Okay, and then you can even, no, mine's already set up too fast. Okay, if you use white glue for this, it does give you a little bit more working time. I'm just going to smooth out a lot of this excess here with my applicator handle. I'm going to call that good. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry for several hours. Okay, now I do want to address the next step here. According to the instructions, they want us to put the launch lugs on next. I am going to delay that until after I put the fins on. And the reason for that is that I am planning to use a fin alignment guide that fits over the tube to help keep the fins on straight. And if you have the launch lugs already installed, it won't fit. So skipping over the launch lugs for the moment, our next task is to assemble the ejection baffle. Again, this comes as its own little sub-kit with its own instructions. So just open that up. Alright, so we should have a coupler and then 2 baffle plates. And whichever design you get, the idea here is that the holes in the baffle are offset. Either this way, where you have some in the center and some around the circumference, or in some cases it may be half on one side and half on the other. They all work in the same way in that they prevent the direct flow of hot gases from the ejection charge to the parachute, and instead make those gases bounce around and become turbulent in here, giving them time to cool off before reaching the parachute. So we will start by putting this screw eye into the forward baffle plate here, and it has a little hole just for doing this. And here I'm going to use just a little bit of wood glue. White glue will also work here. Wood glue is a little bit stronger and it also dries faster. And so I'm just going to put a little dollop right on that hole. And now I'm going to screw down the screw eye just until I can't see that top thread anymore. I don't want to go past it. I don't want the blank shank here down in the wood. Okay, and then on the back side, it's pushed some of the glue through, and I'm just going to add a little bit more to that, and that'll just give us a really good strong anchor here. Okay, now I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, and while that is drying, I'm going to put a bead of glue here around the inside edge of one end of the coupler, doesn't matter which. Okay, I'm going to smooth that around with my finger. If you get any on the outside, like I got there, just go ahead and wipe that off, because we don't want to increase the circumference of the coupler. Alright, then we're going to take our other baffle plate and just push that into the glue. Alright, and I want to put that in so there's just a little bit of a lip of the coupler above the plate there. Okay. Alright, and now I'm going to let both of those pieces just sit still and dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll come back to put everything back together. My glue has pretty much completely dried on both sections now, and so now I'm going to put another bead of glue in here. Like that. And I'm going to spread this a bit thinner, but also a bit wider than I did the previous one. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to put this in edgewise and then flip it up like that, and then I'm going to pull it forward a bit and give it just a little bit of a twist. Okay, and then for the most part doing this pulls the glue into the spaces here and forms a little fillet. There's a little blank space here, and I'm just going to take this excess glue on my finger here and just put that right along the edge. Alright, now I'm going to turn it back over to the other side, and I'm just going to put a small fillet of glue in here. Because this will have to take the force of the ejection charge on it, so you do want it well reinforced. And again, I'm just going to take a finger here and smear that around. Okay, let's see if we can get a close-up here. Alright, so this will form a fillet in there, and on this side, simply pulling the plate forward help form a fillet around here. Now this just needs to dry for about half an hour, and then it will be ready to go into your model rocket. Our next task is to sand the fins, and initially we want to do all of the edges here. And so I'm just going to lay down some fine sandpaper, and then I'm going to gather the set of large fins together here so that they're all aligned. And I'm just going to drag each of the edges across my sandpaper here. And this will just remove any imperfections, the little nubbins there where the laser cutter left behind. Okay, and basically I'm going to do this until most of the charred wood there is gone. Leave a little bit there if you need to, that's fine. Anything loose though we don't want. And then I'm just going to change over here and do the next edge. And then we also have the set of small fins that go on the aft side, or the aft end I should say, and we'll do the same thing with those. There we go. Okay. Now, according to the instructions, the only streamlining we need to do is to round off the leading edges. And so for the long fins, it's just this edge here. And then for the little short fins, it will be this edge here. And I will do that off camera. We just need to sand the edges and just keep doing that until they come close together in a nice rounded, pleasing shape. Now, also at this point, you will want to consider whether you want to treat the fins with any type of sanding sealer, or if you want to paper the fins or things like that. Just for the sake of brevity in this video, I am not going to treat these fins other than to sand them lightly. If you do want to know more about some of these other techniques, check out my other Rocketarium videos. In at least one of those, I paper the fins, and then in other ones, I use a polyurethane-based sealer, and still in other ones, water-based sealers. So you can also just check the internet. There are a lot of good videos out there for those applications. I've sanded and rounded my fins, and again, I have not treated these in any other way. Something to be aware of if you do decide to treat the fins is that depending on how heavy of a coating of sanding sealer you use, or how much glue and paper you use for lamination, you can potentially alter the center of gravity to the point where the rocket becomes unstable. So if you're going to do any of those types of fin treatments, do make sure and do a stability test before launching. Most likely you're going to be fine. Alright, so I've got my tube here that we marked previously, and recall that I have not put on the launch lugs yet, even though that was an earlier step. And as I said before, the reason for that is I'm going to use a fin alignment guide that slips over the body tube in order to speed up my gluing process. Now I'm going to have to make some marks on my fin alignment lines here. So the main fins, the long ones, they are going to attach 3 3/16 of an inch from the aft end. Now that sounds a lot like somebody converted a metric to an imperial unit. So 3 3/16 is right there. Yeah, basically it's 8 centimeters. Okay, so I'm just going to measure on each of my fin lines here. And just put a little tick mark there. Okay, that's my launch lug line. I don't need to worry about it at the moment. Okay, so I've got those all the way around. And then for the smaller fins, those are going to be placed 9/16 of an inch from the aft end. Okay, so 9/16 would be right there. And if you're metrically inclined, it's going to be 1.5 centimeters. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do here is roughen the area between the base of the fin here and its tip. Okay, and the idea here is to remove the glossy glassine layer all along our fin lines here, and this will allow the glue to stick better. Just use some fine 150 to 220 grit sandpaper and just sand along the line. You don't need to sand so much that the line goes away, and if you do, you can just redraw it. Okay, so that's pretty good. And then I'm just going to repeat that for the other lines off camera. We'll also need to do the same thing down here for our small fins, so that distance there, roughen that up as well. I've roughened up all of my lines. I also did the launch lug line while I was roughening everything else. And now we're going to glue on the fins here, starting with the long ones. And use either wood or white glue. And here we just want a thin film. Like that. And I'm just going to take my finger and spread that along there. Okay, you actually don't want to get too much or it's going to take longer to dry. Okay, I'm just going to set that here for a minute. Now the problem with having a really long skinny fin like this is that it's going to want to warp. Okay, so I'm going to put this on. Here's my mark. I'm just going to run it down along the line. Alright, I'm going to touch the glue onto it, and then I'm going to pull it back off. I'm going to let this get tacky for 30 to 60 seconds, and then we'll put the fin back on it. Alright, now that my glue is tacked up a little bit, I'm going to put the fin back on. Alright, and by letting it get tacky, it will stick there of its own accord fairly well. Alright, now the tricky part is lining everything up. As I said, this long piece is going to try and bow. And so we want to do our best to keep it lined up here. Without putting we don't want to put a bow in it. We want to get everything aligned at the same time. Otherwise you're going to get a spiraling rocket, which can be cool, but this really isn't meant to be one. Alright, and then check and make sure that you have the fin perpendicular. Man, that has got a real bow in it. Okay, so if you look down along it like a gun sight, you'll be able to tell whether or not you've got a bowed fin. And this one really is. So and if you find that you're having trouble with the glue setting up too quickly, you can use white glue instead of the wood glue if you need more working time. Alright, that's better. Alright, now I'm going to let this dry. As I said, I'm going to use a fin alignment guide on this. And if you have two of them, that would be even better. Unfortunately, I only have one. But something I've found doing these videos for Rocketarium is most of their kits are based on a BT60 body tube. So if you get yourself a couple of 3-fin and 4-fin BT60 fin alignment guides, you'll be set to do most of their kits. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry and then do the other 3 fins of the long ones, and then we'll come back and do the short fins. The 4 long fins have dried, and checking them, they are pretty straight, still in alignment. Up here on forward, we've got a little bit of separation right in here, but we'll be able, I'll be able to fix that with fillets after I get the other fins on, and the same with this fin here. So the aft fins are going to go on the same way. I'm just going to go on and, like we did before, apply a thin layer of glue, touch it to the tube, and then pull it off to let it get tacky. Okay, and remember, this does not go all the way flush with the aft end, but 9/16 of an inch forward. Alright, so I'll place this back on, and here I'm going to compare it with the long fin. So use the longer fin as an alignment guide, because even if you got one or more of the long fins a little bit off center or not quite equidistant, it's still going to look better if your aft fins line up with the forward fins rather than trying to have perfect aft fins if you had imperfect forward fins. So I'm going to let this dry and then go on and do the same for the other 3 aft fins. Now that my fins are dry, I'm going to go back to step 5 in the attachment of the launch lugs. Remember, I had left these off so that I could use a fin alignment guide to put the fins on. And so the first of these is going to go 11 inches from the aft end. So So I'm just going to take my ruler here. You come up here and make a little tick mark there. And here I'm going to use the wood glue again. Just kind of even that out. Now, unlike the fins, you really don't need to put this on and take it off and let it get tacky. There's not a lot of strain being put on it. Okay, and so here I'm just going to make sure that everything's straight, and it appears to be. And then the second launch lug is going to be flush with the aft end of the rocket. Alright, so here again, just going to smooth that out. So first I'm going to line this with my launch lug line, and then I'm going to sight down this to make sure that the tube and the forward launch lug and the aft launch lug all line up. And they do. So I'll let this dry for a while, and when we come back we'll start doing the fillets for the fins and the launch lug. While I'm waiting for the launch lug to dry, I'm going to jump ahead here to the joining of the body tubes. I'm just going to do this backwards from what they show it here. So first thing we're going to do is find the midpoint here on the coupler / ejection baffle. Okay, I'm just going to make a little line there at 1 inch. Now the way they show it is they glue the aft end of the baffle here into the main body tube first, and then glue on this part. I'm going to do just the opposite, just in order to save some time here. So before we glue anything, we need to attach the shock cord. And here, if you want to substitute something like a 100-pound Kevlar line, that would be fine. Just make sure you use at least 3 times the length of the rocket in Kevlar. Now I'm going to go ahead and just use the rubber shock cord that came with the kit. And here just tie a double knot or 2 half hitches into here, and then just pull it from both ends to work it down really well. Okay. If you have more than about this much excess, go ahead and cut that back, but don't cut it all the way down to the knot. The amount I've got here is fine, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then I'm just going to apply a little dab of glue onto the knot. Now, if you're using the rubber shock cord like I have here, you can use white glue or wood glue to do this. Okay, if you're using a Kevlar shock cord, you can use super glue to do the same thing. It just locks the knot in place. But do not use super glue on the rubber. It will cause it to deteriorate and snap prematurely. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is gather up the shock cord here and stick it through the forward body tube. Okay, and I'm just dry fitting this now, but this will go in till we reach that midway point, and then the shock cord comes out the other end and eventually attaches to the nose cone. Okay, so now what we have to do is apply some glue up inside of here, preferably without gluing the shock cord, at least not too much. So I'm going to take that shock cord back out for the moment, and we'll drop it back in just a moment here. And I'm going to take a cotton applicator here and get some glue. You could just do this with the nozzle of your glue bottle. You can do it with your finger. I just like the control that I have with this. Okay, and I'm just going to run a film of glue, pretty heavy, all the way around this. You can go ahead and bring it right to the edge. Okay, and I'm going to carefully drop the shock cord through once more and try to avoid touching the glue. I'm just kind of holding my fingers here. Alright, get out of the glue there. Okay, and I'm just going to slide this in and turn it a little bit as I do so until I get to my line. Come on, camera, come in focus. There we go. Alright, so right to the line, and you can give it a little bit of a turn back and forth there to help seat it in the glue. And then just pull the shock cord taut. Don't pull it too hard or you'll pull the coupler all the way through. But pull it taut so it's not laying in the glue, and then just set this aside and let that glue dry for a while. My launch lugs have dried enough, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the fillets for everything on here. I'm just going to show the first set here and then do the rest of them off camera. But I like to do one face at a time. So I'm going to do this one here. I'm just going to run a bead of glue all the way down and have some tissues handy here. Okay, and then I'm just going to smooth this down. Right, and especially work it into the areas where we had gaps there. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the opposite fin on the same face. Alright, now this one didn't have the gap, so it's not going to take quite as much glue. But once more, I'm just going to smooth that all the way down. Okay. And then we can do the same thing with the aft fins here. And then the other one. Okay. Now I'm going to let these dry for 5 to 10 minutes, just enough that they skin over and won't flow freely, and then go to the next face and repeat this for the other 3 faces as well as for the launch lugs. My fillets have dried, and the next task is to completely attach the 2 tubes together here. So we already put the baffle in the upper tube, and now we'll just do a similar thing down here on the lower tube. So I'm going to take my wood glue here, I'm just going to place a bead of glue all around the inside edge here. Okay, so like that. And now I'm just going to insert the the other end of the coupler, twist it back and forth here a little bit so that the glue is set well. Okay, and just make sure the tubes are straight. If you want to line the spirals, you can. It doesn't make a lot of difference. Alright, and now I'm going to let that dry as well. The next step for this rocket would be painting before you put the parachute in and tie up the shock cord. I am not going to do a painted rocket in this video just because it's winter and it's very cold outside and difficult to paint. However, the painting scheme for this is very easy. So the rocket main part here is done in olive green, and then the nose cone itself is painted white, and that's all there is to it. So I would suggest at this point go ahead and paint your rocket before doing the final assembly. But I'm going to go on to the final step here and put the parachute on. For the parachute, lay the whole thing flat, and this is a hexagonal parachute, so we have 3 sets of shroud lines that are tied off at each end. Okay, and the first thing we want to do here is simply take those shroud lines and loop them around one finger like this, and then pull the whole parachute up and hold it in its center with your other hand. Okay, so I've got my fingers looped here, I've got the parachute grabbed over here, and now I just want to see that all of the corners here, come on, focus, here we go. Alright, we want all these corners to be at approximately the same level here. And if they aren't, you can adjust the loops around your finger. Okay, but that looks pretty good right there. Okay, so over here on my other hand, I've pinched off the loops so they don't change size on me while I'm handling this. And according to the directions, we simply place these through the eyelet here. Come on, eyelet. There we go. Alright, and then still maintaining that loop, pass the entire parachute through this loop, or you can pull it through and pass the nose cone through. Either way will give you the same result, and as you pull it back, that will tie a knot around the eyelet of the nose cone. Now I'm not going to tie this tightly because I don't like to do it this way. Okay, instead I prefer to put a snap swivel on my parachutes. Once again, I'm going to find my loops here. Okay, and once more put those over a finger, so just like we did before here. And then find the center of the parachute, pull all those corners together once more, and again pinch off the loop here so that it doesn't change length on me. Now here I'm going to use a snap swivel. You get these from fishing departments of sporting goods or department stores. And now I'm going to pass those loops through the swivel end of my snap swivel. And now pass the snap swivel through the loop and pull those down taut like that. Okay, and then I'm going to check once more, make sure that my corners haven't shifted too much and they're still fine. And then what we can do is just put a little tiny dab of glue here on the knot so that it does not come untied. Okay, and now the snap part simply goes on over the eyelet. Okay, just like that. And now this gives us the ability to change the chute out rapidly. So if you had a really windy day and you want a smaller chute, you can just pop this off, put a new one on. The one thing you do have to be aware of is the size of the snap relative to the size of the eyelet. You could use a smaller snap swivel here and not have any problem with the weight of the rocket and how much weight it can handle. The critical thing is whether or not the snap part will fit over the eyelet of your nose cone. So this is actually a little bit bigger snap swivel than I would typically use for a rocket this size, but because it has this really heavy eyelet, I've got a little bit bigger snap. Okay, and then the final thing to do will be to tie on the shock cord here. I'm not going to do this really tightly because, as I just mentioned earlier, you're going to want to paint the rocket first, and it's a lot easier to do if you haven't attached the nose cone yet. But once you do get to this point, just make a double knot or 2 half hitches. Alright, and pull it tightly, which I am not doing here. But after you've got it all pulled down, if you have more than about this much on the free end of the knot, go ahead and trim that back to about that length. And the idea here is you don't want any of the free end of the shock cord to get stuck between the shoulder of the nose and the body tube. That could result in an ejection failure. And then you can also take a little white or wood glue and put that into the knot as well to help keep it from coming undone. Don't use super glue or plastic cement for that part though. It will melt the rubber. So with that, I'm going to finish this video. All that's left to be done here is to paint and put the decals on. And with that, I hope you enjoyed building this kit. Have a great launch, a safe recovery, and you'll see me in the next video.